Good evening and welcome to the Monday edition of the Gold, Goats, and Guns Hour here on YouTube and Periscope. My name is Tom Luongo. I hope y'all had a great weekend. It is Monday, July 23rd, 2018. So, we've got a lot to talk about tonight. For those of you who are new, please check out the blog over at goldgoatsandguns.com. You can subscribe and support my work over at my Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns. The big news for me is in about an hour and a half or so, or about an hour and 45 minutes, I'm going to be on with Jeff Rentz's radio program for an hour. We're going to discuss the article I wrote last week called In the U.S., CIA, sometimes CIA-EU. So we're going to discuss that article, the brewing civil war, and that should be a lot of fun. So you're old. Huh. Okay, so we got people who are starting to stream in. We'll say hello as I can. Want to talk about... It's funny, I didn't have a lot prepped for tonight because I lost most of yesterday. We had a major storm whip through North Florida, 60-mile-an-hour winds, tornadoes, 10 to 12 inches of rain, and about 9 hours worth of lost power. I got to catch up on some board gaming. That was fun. We had to run the generator. We had to do a bunch of things. So really today I was just trying to catch up with the stuff I didn't get done over the weekend. So I still owe Strategic Culture an article for instance, which I'm going to have to work on tomorrow. And I still don't have an idea for one yet. So that'll be fun. But for my commentary for the evening, I want to talk about what happened today and with regards to Rand Paul. Let's talk about Rand Paul because it's great to see what's happening here. Rand Paul is rapidly becoming the guy that we thought he would be when he was elected back in what, 2010? No, 2012. Whenever it was. And 2010. And he's becoming one of the president's best allies by... It's funny. Rand Paul embodies the kind of skepticism and balanced... I want to say balanced. And I know the libs will like go crazy about this because how could Rand Paul be balanced? But balanced support of the president. Okay? That in many ways I strive to do here, which is to say, you praise him when he does things you like, and you give him the beans when he does things he's not supposed to. And when he screws up. And that's really important. It's important to understand that we remain in that mode. It'll be hard at times. It will feel like you're not fully supporting Trump or whether it'll be hard, but you have to. You have to maintain your rationality at all points. So, just ultimately Rand Paul is a realist. Trump is in power. He's accepted the fact that he's in power. You're not going to sit there and ignore the fact that, ignore reality. Ron Paul did not raise a fool. It's you either take your job as senator seriously and say, well, this is the guy I've got to work with. I've got to figure out a way to work with him. He's the president. You either accept that or you allow your ego to rule your life and you sit in the corner and play. I'm referring now to a comment from user 13 about Paul never having Paul working with Trump now after the debates. But the important thing to remember here is that look at what Paul's doing. He's reminding everyone of the real issues. We have leaks everywhere. Why do people like Clapper and Brennan and Comey and Susan Rice and the rest of them still have their security clearances? No, Rand isn't influential within the Senate. He's angling for a more influential position because he rightly senses that Trump is winning. He rightly senses that the old guard is losing their positions. The John McCain is practically gone. I mean, Feinstein and the rest of them, they're all holding on to try and hold out hope that they can get Trump impeached and keep everything together, but they know it's failing. Then Paul is just getting started. And so this is the time when Trump is ascendant in his fight against the neocons and the deep state and everybody else on foreign policy, that he jump in and support him here while at the same time supporting him on domestic issues. It's really actually really quite savvy politics. And Paul's been angling for this for a while, since, he's been trying to work with Trump on healthcare reform and trying to work with him on good healthcare reform, not crappy healthcare reform. Again, that kind of balanced approach, and say, look, I want healthcare reform as badly as everybody else. The problem is you don't want to sign a bad bill just to say that you got rid of Obamacare, right? Going back to that debate from last year. So it's the same thing. So the breaking news that that Trump is considering revoking all of these guys' security clearance is fantastic. Okay? And it was an idea put into his head by Rand Paul, who met with the president today. This is exactly what he should be doing. By the way, I don't know if you guys saw this, but Rand Paul is going to be going to Russia to discuss security and peace issues and to try and continue to further open up dialogue between the Russian government and the United States government and diplomatic terms. He's going over there to now act as diplomat. This is big. This is a big deal. All right. This is important stuff. So, and just starting to see the rise of Rand Paul here, emerging as an ally of the president. That puts a very powerful lobby really behind Trump. Because, look, okay, the hardcore anarcho-libertarians don't like Rand Paul because he's, not anarcho-libertarian enough. Well, fine, fuck you, whatever. But most libertarians and most center-right conservatives really respect Paul in a lot of ways because they respected Ron Paul. The neocons don't. The establishment doesn't. But those guys are all leaving the party anyway. Remember, my principal operating thesis at this point is that the Democrats are going to implode in a few months. Completely. They're going to get completely wiped out. And in that wipeout, we're going to see, and it's already starting. They already know that they're in trouble. Okay? That once they're wiped out, now the Democratic Party splits. The neocons and the Trotskyites that have been hijacked the Republican Party to make them into effectively the rear guard for the shadow government, the globalists, to do all the work to continue building this transnational police state that they've been building. They're effectively the rear guard for the Democrats who lead the charge. Those guys are all going to have to jump ship to the Democrats. And, I saw a couple of things today we were discussing on our private Slack channel. There was a Rasmussen poll that came out that said, 65% of Democrats think Trump's a traitor, and around 30% of Republicans think Trump is a traitor or a stooge of Putin or whatever you want to call it, right? Now, when you do the math on that, that comes up to about 30 to 35% maximum. I mean, 2/3 of Democrats is 20%. The Democrats are only around 30%, 32%, whatever. You pick a number between 28 and 32, and that's what the real number is. And the same thing with the Republicans; they're somewhere between 26 and 29. And so now take 1/3 of Republicans, and generously, you wind up around 30%. Everybody else is like either on Trump's side or in the middle. And I got news for you: the middle all wants peace. And they want prosperity, and they want the troops to come home, and they want this partisan bickering in Washington to end, and they want the swamp drained, and they want all of it. They're tired of it. Left and right. They're tired of the anarcho-tyranny. They're tired of the power for me and not for thee bullshit. They're tired of all of it. That's why the Democrats are going to be the new permanent underclass in the United States, in the United States electorate for the next probably generation. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be just like after World War II. This is what I talked about in this last month's newsletter that came out. Very important point. So, when you start to really push, when you start to think that thesis through, it's very obvious that the Republican Party is going to be remade as a kind of center-right libertarian party that'll move up the Nolan chart just a little bit, not a lot, a little bit. It moves up the Nolan chart 10% off of this 10% north of center. That's a huge shift in American politics, especially as the Democrats shift farther left authoritarian, shift farther left fascist. It's not the degree away from center that's important. It's the difference between them that's important. Because the farther that split becomes, the more they're going to get rejected, the more that Trump succeeds, the more they'll just bandy behind Trump, because it's obvious at this point he's trying to work to undo a tremendous amount of the foreign entanglements that are bankrupting us. So now let's take that one step further. This morning, we see James Comey come out and say, oh no, you have to support moderate Democrats. And I saw this all over the weekend, all over my Twitter feed, like 4 or 5 different places. It's already starting. Because you know why? They saw the poll numbers. The latest Gallup polls came out. I didn't see anything in the American press on it. I had to, it got thrown up on the Independent. What is the Nolan chart? The Nolan chart is the Dave Nolan's chart of the political spectrum, which is not a line but a diamond. I'll find a picture of it and I'll throw it up here in just a minute. Hold on for just a second. Before I go too much further, let me do that. Well, will be if I do that. Yeah, it might be big enough. Let's try that. Desktop. Transition over. So this is the Nolan chart. If you've never seen it before, it's published by the Advocates for Self-Government. But you figure that the U.S. electorate has been steadily moving slightly center-right for a long time. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. I would say we're somewhere between the I and the S here. All we have to do is move up 10, 15% towards libertarian, while the Democrats slide this way and down, and that difference becomes huge. And yes, the latest numbers out of Gallup, which I had to see out of the Independent in the UK, was that Trump's approval rating went up a point after they called him a traitor for a week, because obviously that's not working. So, and once they saw that, and they know what these numbers look like, and they can see the fundraising numbers, and they can see the internal polling numbers and the push polling numbers and the rest of it. I can tell you, guys, there ain't going to be no blue wave. Okay? Take it from the person who knew in March of 2016 that Donald Trump was going to win that election almost to the fucking state. I got Colorado wrong. Maybe one other. There's almost no way there's a blue wave in November. If not, it's a red tide. And the red tide, and what washes up on shore in this red tide will be most of the Democratic leadership. It'll be ugly. And the latest, and it'll be a populist, center-right, libertarian GOP. GOP voter support for Trump is at Bush after 9/11 levels. Yeah, peace does that. Peace or being attacked, right? But peace does that. It's how Obama was elected. Everybody forgets that everybody thinks Obama was elected because it's some new America that was going to usher in an age without racism, without fear, and where everybody could walk around with their genitals hanging out and all this other horse shit. They forgot it was just people were tired of 8 years of war. Obama was the peace candidate. Trump was the peace candidate. We're coming into an election cycle. Peace with North Korea. Just talk with the Russians. He's invited Putin to the White House. He's called Iranian President Hassan Rouhani 10 times to request a meeting. And Rouhani has told him to go scratch 10 times. And I don't blame Rouhani. I wouldn't talk to Trump right now. Not until he actually does something substantial and real with the Russians. They've got plenty of time for a meeting. But I'll bet you dollars to dog shit that Trump and Rouhani will meet before the sanctions are reinstated. Book it. It will happen. Because Trump is ratcheting up the rhetoric against the Iranians are ratcheting up the rhetoric against Trump and against the United States. They can play the art of the deal just as well as everybody else. The Iranians are really good. Ari Mugu asks, massive lies and fake news, how does democracy survive? Well, you're assuming that we have democracy. We had a little bit of democracy break out here in the United States, and you've seen what happened since then. It's been nothing but nearly 2 years worth of an open insurrection against the president. Do I think the mullahs will be gone before 2020? Doubtful. I think the mullahs will lose power once the United States stops trying to destroy Iran from the inside out through external pressure and the rest of it. Because that brings me to my next point. And that's to remind everybody. What did I say about North Korea? I said that the United States had to negotiate because Kim had a nuclear weapon. You can't, guys, you can't go for regime change once they've got a nuke. You can't continue to go for regime change against the Russians because Trotsky lost the internal fight between him and Stalin in the 1940s. When they are at least a generation ahead in missile technology. Pepe Escobar's latest article, which is, I've got linked down below in the description of the stream tonight. It's up on Zero Hedge right now. That's where I found it. Goes over all of this again to remind everybody that Putin's March 1st speech, which I also have not talked about in a while, but I remind you, I said would be a watershed event in geopolitics. It would change everything, and it has changed everything. And it will continue to pay dividends for them. The military-industrial complex, the $1 trillion a year defense et al. Industry in the United States has been exposed as completely irrelevant and obsolete. So Trump has to sue for peace with Putin. That's why they're trying to brand him a traitor. Because they don't want to lose their gravy train and they want to keep this thing going. Putin, for his part, has walked away from so many opportunities at provocation. I can't count them anymore. He really has run this opposition to the United States in such a way as to allow us to save face and to destroy ourselves, but unless we want to destroy ourselves in the process. I think Trump understands that. I think he understands that that's the dynamic here. So here we are. It's the middle of 2018. We don't have missile systems that can match the Russians at all. The U.S. Navy is honestly probably sitting ducks right now. As Escobar reminds everybody in that article, and the book, effectively it's a book review from a Russian military analyst. If you remember back to October of 2015, right after the Russians intervened in Syria, ballistic missiles were fired from a destroyer in the Caspian Sea, 1,100 kilometers away, and hit targets with pinpoint accuracy, and the Russians let everybody know about it. They didn't just do it, and then it was leaked out. They announced it to the world. At which point, the USS Teddy Roosevelt hightailed it the fuck out of there. That's reality, folks. That's reality. And so when you're in that situation, the best thing and the smart thing for the president to do is to sit down and start talking to people. Because his job is not his political future. His job is to protect the people he represents. That's his job. And that these people continue to run the narrative that we can't possibly talk to the Russians because they're the bad guys is moronic. It's childish, it's immature, and it's dangerous. The younger generations do not watch the news. Go look at the cable news ratings. Go look at the numbers. They're terrible. Ari Magoo was asking me about what the younger generations are watching. They're getting their news. They're getting their news from alternate sources. Now, the other thing, you have to remember that the thing is, what they've been trying to do through social media, through the manipulation of social media algorithms and everything else, is to only funnel the establishment sources through the search engines and everything else. Wow, I didn't see that, Joanne. So Joanne Leone pops up. She saw an article that a Russian in a private firm was arrested for treason for passing intel to a NATO country on the new missile systems. Wow, be big if it's true. And I'm not saying that, I'm not discounting that, but you know, that would be big if it's true. I mean, I haven't watched the news, and I haven't watched cable news of any form or another. I don't even like watching clips of cable news on YouTube or anything. I mean, honestly, I can't even stand. I can honestly, I can barely stand to watch Tucker Carlson, who's good, who's objectively good, but invariably everything has to devolve into a shouting match, which is, or you know, it's just people who are, you know, like ideologically possessed, speaking their talking points, while Tucker looks at them like, you know, I mean, that's what Tucker Carlson does for an hour, and it's funny, but it gets old after a while. So, I mean, the only television I watch is specific television series that I find interesting, and there's really not all that many of those anymore. I've really cut most of those out as well. There's a few that I watch, but not much, and certainly. And almost nothing that glorifies the state. I don't think I've ever watched an entire episode of, for example, like 24 or CSI, or I've watched like 5 or 10 episodes of Law and Order. I mean, honestly, And well, I don't even watch. Please, I don't watch anything with advertising. You got to be kidding me. I haven't ingested a commercial. The last time I ingested a television commercial willingly was when I went to a local burger joint and they had Fox News on the air for dinner. That might have been 3 months ago. Oh wow. Okay, cool. It's on Sputnik. Yeah, Joanne, if you'd send that to me in a DM, that would be fantastic. So I still have my soft spot for genre stuff. I still watch a lot of Canadian sci-fi and whatnot, but science fiction. But I watch The Expanse. Christ, I've been rewatching Continuum again simply because the show's so freaking good. I've watched the whole run like 3 times because the show is fantastic. Because here we are with effectively a TV procedural that is a complete and utter refutation and meditation on the use of violence as a way to achieve your social and political goals. And the show consistently came down on the side of it's a bad idea. I can't get enough of that. I just can't. It's like so rare to see this in American television or in any kind of television, certainly Canadian television. It's invariably statist. So, but it's important to understand that Trump had to sit down and talk to Putin. It was time to do so, not just for political reasons, relative to the midterms, but it was time because you cannot allow this degradation or lack of any communication between the Russians and the Americans to go on any longer. It's not healthy. As Trump points out, 90% of the nuclear weapons are controlled by these 2 countries. You think maybe they should talk just a little bit? Немного? Which is Russian for a little bit. Press TV and RT, your thoughts. I read RT regularly. I know their biases. Same thing with Press TV. You'll get good information out of them. You just have to filter out the bias. It's no different than reading the New York Times. You have to filter out the bias of the New York Times and get to the information. Once you've gotten to the information, which is usually buried at the bottom of the article. On RT, the articles are only 300 words long, so you don't have to search. It's not a matter of the thing I'm trying to do is to, in many ways, on top of doing this, is to teach you how to read this stuff. Right? And most of you are already hip to this. I don't have to do this anymore. I'm not doing to most of the regulars. Y'all get it at this point. But as we build the audience, it's important to understand it's not where you get your source from. It's not where you got your information from. It's where you read it or how you read it. It's like when you read something in The Hill or the New York Times or the Washington Post that would normally not be revealed. Then you know that that's somebody trying to get ahead of a story that is going to break and there's no way around it. And so they put it out, they let that information out. It's probably already 2 weeks old, or they only ran with it because they already know that somebody else is going to run with it within 24 hours and the whole thing's going to be real. The Harvey Weinstein thing, for example, it was broke by a major newspaper because it was going to be broke the next day by a minor one. Okay. So remember that's how these things are reported is just as important as everything else. So, but I mean, again, to answer Ari's question, I read Press TV. I don't use it as a definitive source all the time. I read it every once in a while. I pop over there to see what they're saying. But everybody should have their narrative out there, right? Everybody should have their narrative out there. The Russians should have their narrative out there. The Brits should have theirs. The Germans should have theirs. The Americans should have theirs. The Iranians should have theirs. North on 60. Robert Perry was really good, and I do read consortium news, even though it's a little too leftist for my taste. But there's a lot of good information there, because while those guys may be leftists or left-leaning liberals or whatever the hell you want to call them, for the most part, that's the editorial bent of consortium news. They're all good journalists first. They're editorializing, I'm not so crazy about, but they're good journalists, and so that's far more important than anything else. I can ignore their bias, right? It's like, I would hope that, at times you guys would ignore my bias and get to the heart of the information. And yes, Disney firing Gunn, James Gunn, the director of the 2 Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Yeah, they're getting ahead of what's coming next. What's coming next is ugly. There's more coming out of Hollywood, without a doubt. It's a shame. It's a shame that, look, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Entertainment is important. The stories we tell as a culture are important. Politics isn't the only thing, and isn't everything, and it's not the only thing, and it shouldn't be everything or the only thing. We have to jack out of this and watch stories and immerse ourselves in archetypal storytelling. We can't just, it's almost, we've gotten to the point where, so much of the storytelling that's coming out of Hollywood is so bad from a kind of archetypal perspective. Now I'm kind of like channeling Jung and Jordan Peterson here for a second, that we're having to layer those narratives onto our politics. And that's very dangerous, because then all of a sudden political figures become messianic figures, or they become hero figures, or all this. And that's not reality. That's not healthy. Okay. It happened with Obama. It's happening to a smaller extent with Trump, and it's not healthy. You'd like a movie that doesn't involve flying dudes in spandex or a tranny? Well, watch a Coen Brothers movie. American conservative, sometimes they used to be really good on foreign policy. Not recently. They've been terrible in recent months. I'm not sure what the hell happened. But they've been, I've seen some stuff at AmCom Mag, and that's, and I remember when that magazine was started, right? Guys like Justin Raimondo wrote in the very early days of that. He was getting paid not only at antiwar.com, but he was also getting paid over at the American Conservative as well. But some of the stuff I've read out of there recently, we were just like, what the fuck is that? That's not right. Yeah, democracy. Oh no, Amy Goodman, she's controlled opposition. I felt that for 15 years. She's controlled opposition, which is why she hasn't blown up like Alex Jones. I'm convinced now that Alex Jones is as big as he is for the reason he is the way he is. I'm actually to the point now where I actually believe Alex Jones is for real. I don't believe for years I vacillated as to whether he was a psyop or not. Alex Jones is now bigger than the networks. More people watch Alex Jones than watch the networks. I got news for you. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just relaying the news. I think that's half a good thing. Kind of like Alex Jones. I have a soft spot for the guy. If he called, I would definitely take his phone call. I'd definitely go on InfoWars. Has it been bad the last couple of years? Because it was pretty bad during, it was pretty bad during when I last got involved, watching Amy Goodman on a regular basis, was during 2008, 2009 election cycle and the financial crisis. And I wasn't impressed then. But back then, I was also far more radical, far more dismissive, and not nearly as kind of honestly hip to the realpolitik of the situation than I am now. Age, experience, everything gets tempered. Anecdotal aside, my friends are meeting to watch old movies. The last one was Harvey with Jimmy Stewart. Well, love me some Jimmy Stewart, dude. Serious. I'll watch anything with Jimmy Stewart. Anything. Go watch Rope. Rope is one of my favorites. But I liked Rope because it was. There's a variety of reasons why I like Rope, but yeah, no, you should. Joanne, about American Conservative, I've just noticed that there was stuff coming out of there that I was seriously disagreed with on foreign policy, and that's a rare thing. So that means that there's something else going on. Now, Ron Paul is not a conservative. He is a libertarian. He does a good job of trying to fake it, but he's really a hardcore libertarian. Oh yeah, Rope is one of Hitchcock's best films, without doubt, and it's one of Jimmy Stewart's best performances because we finally get a Jimmy Stewart who's morally fluid. What I like about that movie. But there's many things. Vertigo. Odd. Yeah, he's great in Vertigo. I just love Jimmy Stewart. So, Rear Window. Yes, that was the other one I was thinking of. Thank you for reminding me. All those movies with him. And I'm not really crazy about his Capra films. I don't really like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington very much. I don't particularly like Frank Capra very much. So, I mean, It's a Wonderful Life is okay, but I much prefer him with Hitchcock. I thought Hitchcock brought out the best of him because Hitchcock would dare to make Jimmy Stewart into the bad guy. That's where he became interesting. It's like watching Jimmy Stewart and Harrison Ford are very similar in that for most of their careers, no one would ever believe they were the bad guy. Oh, and the Rope is 2 shots, right? It's just two shots. It's amazing. But, I'm kind of way off kilter here, but I like to do this because I'm really kind of almost tired of talking about the geopolitics. I'm about to do it for another hour. But, it's like, remember when Harrison Ford, the first time he was in Presumed Innocent, the Scott Turow, the adaptation of the Scott Turow novel, and we're like, no one's going to believe he did it. It's Harrison Ford. Who the fuck is going to believe that he killed his wife? And then, if you've not seen, What Lies Beneath, I won't spoil it for you, but he's the bad guy. Tommy should watch how the scene where George explains how credit works and the savings and loan. Yeah, that's the problem I have with It's a Wonderful Life is that George is wrong. He's made a mess of everything. He was wrong. The movie's politics are terrible. He's wrong. Well-intentioned. Just because you have good intentions does not mean that you did the right thing. That's the problem. Your feelings are not my responsibility. Those are the words for the night. Your feelings, Whoopi Goldberg, are not my responsibility. Jeanine Pirro. I mean, how awesome was that thing? Right? What I found interesting about that exchange, I want to divert into that for a second, because this one's really important, because it ties into everything else. And this is why the Democrats are going to lose. This is why they're going to be a permanent underclass. It's because if you really listen to that exchange between Jeanine Pirro and Whoopi Goldberg, what happens is that Whoopi starts out immediately going off on her, that, Jeanine Pirro says she accuses Whoopi of having Trump derangement syndrome, which she does. And then Whoopi then turns around and starts talking about, I'm tired of, every conversation starting out with all Mexicans are rapists. No one has ever said that. Or all these other things that are not real. And how I've never seen somebody who engenders this much hate. That's not his responsibility. That's a statement right there of somebody who's saying the feelings you create in another person are your responsibility. No, they're not. You're responsible for how you react to stimuli. No one else is. If you don't like what he's saying, so, and then she turns around and what's it? So what she does is she just defines the problem, which is that, and this is great. This is specificity. So you can see that Whoopi's mind still works because she's defining the problem, specifying the problem. I don't know, there's all this hate and these negative feelings and all of this stuff, and it's wrong. Fine. And then she moves to implementation, and she doesn't have an answer. She says, my problem is I cannot find a way to figure out how to fix this. Remember what I always say about specification versus implementation. The hardest part about politics and about talking to people about problems is specifying what the problem is and then implementing a solution and figuring out whether the projected or prospective implemented solution will actually fix the problem. Socialists always get it wrong. Statists always get it wrong. More government is not the solution. More government is usually the cause of the problem in the first place. So saith the libertarian. And note how I just laid it out for you. Whoopi actually told you she doesn't have an answer. And the reason she doesn't have an answer is because her feelings are not my responsibility. That's the fundamental problem. If Whoopi would take responsibility for her own feelings and her own reactions to things and take responsibility for that, integrate it, deal with it, and then look at what Trump is saying or what Trump is trying to do and try and actually figure out a solution, one would immediately come to mind, but she refuses to do so. Now, so all she wants to do now is scream at people, spit on them, and throw them out of the building. Okay. So Ari asked me, Tom, he does show a certain bias in his speeches. Yeah, he is biased. And the media only shows his worst side. That is also true. They show him out of context. They try to explain to you what he actually meant by what he said. When, come on, at the end of the day, he's blunt, he's a New Yorker, and he's not the world's best public speaker, especially extemporaneously. Actually, he's better extemporaneously because you can read it on his face. He's looking to solve problems. He's blunt and he's a New Yorker. So Trump calls Mexicans Mexicans. You know why they calls them Mexicans? Because they're Mexican. Scott Adams talks about this all the time. But in California, you can't call them Mexicans. That's a derogatory term. Trump doesn't give a shit about that. Neither do I. They're Mexicans. Why? Because they're from Mexico. Guess what? I'm a blunt, mostly profane Italian from New York. Guess what? Mexicans are Mexicans. That's not a statement of judgment other than the fact that they're from Mexico or of Mexican extraction. That's it. I don't think one way or the other about them. Every Mexican I've ever met has really been really nice. I don't hate people in groups. When individuals give you so many opportunities to hate them after you get to know them. Why would you hate people in groups? North on 68 says the hate Whoopi is talking about is mostly a result of fake media spin and gaslighting. People buy into the narrative. Well, you're right. You are. And Whoopi wants to believe in that narrative. She wants to believe that hate is real. She wants to believe it's genuine because she feels it. Because she doesn't want to examine her own feelings. She doesn't want to look inwardly. The quote for every month's newsletter, for those of you who aren't subscribers, I have a quote that usually tries to tie the whole thing up into a nice big ball. And this month, the quote is from Socrates: "Unexamined life is one not worth living." The media is demanding people hate this person or that country, and people obey unless and that's and it's the truth. That's part of the psyop. It's part of what the CIA and and the intelligence agencies and the shadow government, everybody who runs this stuff. Right. We also understand that, your feelings are not my responsibility. We'll be nice when we have to be. If you're an asshole, we got news for you. Here come both barrels. Just a finger on both triggers all the time. I mean, I do care what people think of me. Obviously, I'm trying to drum up business by mentioning here on YouTube for an hour. But at the same time, I'm not going to filter who I am because that's not authentic and that's not going to work. I mean, I don't believe for a second that Whoopi Goldberg isn't genuine in that outrage and that anger and that visceral negative and the visceral reaction she had to all this. But she's not examining who she is. She's lost in a fugue of her own devising. Or it's just a fugue. She's in a fugue state, and it's very dangerous. How will Trump get a second term? By continuing to do exactly what he's doing. Do you really see anybody other than massive voter fraud, do you really see anybody on the Democrats challenging this guy at this point? Who would want to get into the political ring with Donald Trump and go 15 rounds on the Democrats? Who? Think about it. Who? Who's got the stones to stand up to him? Nobody. But the only one who possibly could would be Tulsi Gabbard, and I don't think she's got the chops for it. So. You got to look at what's out there. They're not raising any money at this point. They know what's going on. Joe Biden would do it if the party would let him. Yeah, the problem is Joe Biden is a pedophile. That's the problem. And they know it. Biden was the best insurance policy Obama ever had. I know she is. That's why she'll get crushed. I like her. I love her anti-war stance. I don't like anything else about her. I mean, politically. But, what's she going to do? Trump made peace with North Korea, got them to denuclearize. Trump makes peace with the Russians. Trump ultimately makes peace with Iran and along with Putin, figures out Syria. What's she going to run on? Cy Hirsch said, this is funny actually, and I believe this coming from Cy Hirsch. Eric Holder wants to run with Comey as VP. That's fucking great. Oh my God, that's the funniest fucking thing I've ever heard. No, seriously, that's like... Okay, stream's over. I'm done. I ain't got nothing else. Eric Holder. Holder and Comey. 2020. We're not in jail. Vote for us because we're not in jail? Oh my God. Wow. Okay, Dwayne Johnson. Seriously. The problem is that Johnson is being groomed, and and Thordoom's got a good point, because, okay, Dwayne Johnson's being groomed because they understand that he's a guy who could campaign. No, the thing about The Rock, I'm gonna take this one seriously for a second, because my wife and I have been talking about this for a while now, since the first kind of like that Rolling Stone article with the Rock a few months ago, back in March or February or whatever, because it was first broached then. That's what they want. They want someone. They're looking up and down the line. They're trying to figure out somebody, and The Rock is Dwayne Johnson really is the only like guy in Hollywood who could stand up to Trump at this point. And the reason why is because, and if you really listen to Dwayne Johnson talk, he's a very conscientious person. Incredibly conscientious person. So he wants to do the right thing. He wants to craft solutions. The problem is that if Johnson was actually got serious about running, Trump would just call him up and have lunch with him. And by the time Trump was done having lunch with Dwayne Johnson, Johnson would be out there campaigning for Trump. That's the problem. Johnson doesn't really hold any strong political motivations other than doing what's right for the country. Okay? He is smart. And he is a good guy, and he means well. And he takes his job very seriously. He takes the image of his job very seriously. Dwayne Johnson is not to be taken lightly. Okay? Not to be taken lightly. At all. But I honestly think that all Trump would have to do is sit down and talk with him for about an hour. And then that would end it. And Johnson would just come out in support of Trump, ultimately. And now that Dwayne Johnson is bigger than Hollywood, for all intents and purposes, because he can open the biggest pile of shit imaginable to $1 billion in China, he's not really libertarian. I mean, not. He's a guy who really believes in hard work and honesty, and he's just a guy who works his ass off, and being honest is important to him, and being a stand-up guy is important to him. It's why he doesn't like Vin Diesel, right? It's why they had that fight on the set, and Johnson won't say anything nice about Vin Diesel because he just thought Vin Diesel was an asshole who wasn't ready, who showed up for work unprepared, and that's not Dwayne Johnson. Now, I like The Rock. I mean, I like Johnson a lot, and I have he's a guy who will do whatever, he will self-improve at every level. So if he ran for president, he would spend the next 2 years, if he was serious about it, he would spend the next 2 years boning up on every policy decision that he wants. Yeah, he is more left than libertarian, but he's at least reasonable. And I'm telling you, he's flexible of mind. That's what he is. That's his greatest strength as a candidate, is that he's flexible of mind. Right. All right, guys, I've got another hour show to do in about an hour, and I'd like to rest my voice and get my thoughts together before I do that. Oh, I would love Johnson to be his VP. That would be fantastic. Get rid of Mike Pence, but I don't see that happening. But I think that Trump could, to tie a bow around this, I think Trump could neuter the threat of Dwayne Johnson very, very easily. All he would have to do is sit down and talk with him. Upcoming radio appearance, I'll be on the rentsradio.com in about an hour, 10 o'clock. Okay. And then I'm sure that I'll get a link to it or whatever. Rand Paul for VP would be good too. Either way. But actually, I don't want Rand Paul as VP. I want Rand Paul as Senate Majority Leader. I want him in charge of the armed forces. I want him to take over the chairmanships of all the committees that John McCain's the chair of. That's where he has real power. VP is a figurehead position. It's the end of your political career. Rand Paul's at the beginning of his career. I want him as Senate Majority Leader. Sessions is going to be fired after the midterms, and Trump's going to push to legalize marijuana. And it will not be Trey Gowdy as Attorney General because that guy is a ballless sack of shit. You move Rand Paul into the VP position, and he becomes a figurehead. We don't want him as a figurehead. We want Rand Paul as Senate Majority Leader, or we want Rand Paul running the Armed Forces Committee or the Foreign Affairs Committee or something like that. That's where he has real power. He can be president after Trump is done. He'd be a great president to then put things back together after Trump is done. Remember, Rand Paul is Gen X. He's not a boomer. All right, you guys take care. We'll talk. Hopefully we'll see you in an hour or so. Assuming, of course, that I get the Skype invite from these guys. So I'm going to go take care of that now. All right, you guys take care, and we'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.